Thank you all for being here. We learned a little while ago this morning the outline of the governor's budget proposal, the long-awaited proposal. And all I would say is for the people of Minnesota, get ready for more taxes, which I'm sure is not a surprise. But one thing I would say, too, the governor has been talking a lot about trying to make this a budget or a tax structure that was going to be focused on the wealthy. But one thing we do know from looking at what he has proposed is that everybody in Minnesota is going to be paying more taxes. This is a budget expansion of about 7.6% increase in spending, requiring about a $3.7 billion in new revenue coming into the state. And those revenue increases are going to affect all Minnesotans. Everybody. It's not the wealthy, it is everybody. So if you're a Minnesotan and you're going to get a haircut, there's going to be a tax. If you're going to get your oil changed, there's going to be a tax. And just go down the list. There's a host of things that are going to be taxed in Minnesota that were not taxed before. And I think that this is one of the central things that needs to be understood by this proposal, that we are getting a large increase in government, much faster than the rate of inflation, much faster than the rate of personal income growth. We're seeing a huge expansion in the rate of spending. And the question I think we all should be asking is, what are we going to get for that, for all those increases in costs that we're going to be paying for all the goods and services that we're going to have to see those taxes hit us on. So we have not had a chance to look through line by line the details of the governor's proposal, but the presentation that we did get did go through that structure of much more tax growth and much more spending growth, and it is pretty clear that it's going to hit everybody. So I would just say to the people of Minnesota, get prepared. Everything is going to get more expensive, and your budgets are going to be much more constrained in the next year.
Thank you, Senator. As the Senator said, the governor has said numerous times over the last couple of years that he will only tax the wealthiest Minnesotans. Today we learned that what he actually meant is he's going to tax every Minnesotan. And we're very concerned about that. We don't think that's the right direction for Minnesota. We don't think that's what's best for Minnesota's economy. A more fitting title for the governor's budget would be that this budget is for a better Wisconsin, because that's where Minnesota's jobs will go. I've said numerous times that as we look at the governor's policies and the DFL legislature's policies as they come forward, that I'm going to ask, is this something that's going to help create jobs in Minnesota? Is this something that's going to make Minnesota a more competitive climate for job creators? I think we can see in this budget that it does not. I had a member of the press in my office here a month ago, and I'll tell a little story about that quickly if that's okay. He asked me what I thought the governor was going to do in his budget, and I said, well, it's very obvious what he's going to do. And of course, the member of the press perked up a little bit that I was going to tell some secrets that I knew. And I said, well, the governor's been saying for the last couple of years that he's going to have a balanced approach. So we've got a $1.1 billion deficit. I expect to see $550 million in reductions and a $550 million in new revenue. What we've seen today, that the governor's balanced approach is $225 million in cuts and $3.7 billion in new taxes. So the governor's balanced approach is a little bit heavy on new taxes, $3.7 billion in new taxes. That's going to hit every Minnesotan. So these are things, back to my earlier comments, these are things that are not going to help Minnesota's economy grow. Over the last couple of years, we dealt with a $6.2 billion deficit. We turned that into what was adds up to about a $2.5 billion surplus in the current biennium. And we've said numerous times, that we did this without raising taxes. The reason that happened is because we didn't raise taxes. The state can see additional revenue because of increased economic activity. And that's what has happened over the last couple of years because of the policies we've put in place. So we feel that that's a much better example of how you recover Minnesota's economy, and we're seeing the fruits of that labor right now. The unemployment rate has gone from 7% 2 years ago to I think it's 5.5% today. There was just another reduction in that number. So we've refilled the cash flow account, refilled the reserve account. We've paid down the school shift, and Minnesota's economy is headed in the right direction. So we feel that this budget does not maintain that. In fact, it turns us in the wrong direction. We think it will make Minnesota less competitive, and it will make it more difficult for Minnesotans to find a job here in Minnesota.
Question: the DFLers are saying, okay, the two things that they didn't wildly embrace this, obviously, but what they like
Taxes not high enough, or
investment in education and lowering property taxes that are both covered in this budget. And that's what they heard in November, and that's what's in this budget. How do you respond to that?
well, I haven't looked at all the detail. The governor in his outline did talk about some money in education. He talked about some money for MNSCU and some grant money for higher education, University of Minnesota, and some all-day kindergarten. And I'm not sure what the total dollars are for that, but it seems to me it was somewhere in the order of maybe a couple $100 million. And I'm not sure, frankly, what kind of reform you get for that money. I think there's lots of things when you talk about higher education and the costs associated with higher education. To me, you need to look at reform of the cost structure of education. I don't know if there's reforms associated with that additional money. But you don't need $3.5 billion of additional taxes to do those things, if that's what your desire is. I think the property tax piece, which is a big part of what the governor is proposing, and again, I'm not sure what kind of reform you're getting at when you're saying, well, our goal is to increase taxes on everybody and then hand that out in some way to reduce property taxes, which are largely being raised by local communities to fund local activities. And so, I'm not sure what the purpose, what the philosophical idea is to try to accomplish. If there are problems in local governments doing things that they ought not to do, is it the function of state government to come in and start to manage that? If maybe that's the general direction we're taking, I'm not sure. But to me, I think the central question is when we're spending this kind of money, increasing spending to this degree, what are we going to get for it? To Representative Daudt's point, is the business climate improving? Is the economy improving? Are people's lives improving? I just don't see when we're asking people to dig in their pockets and pay increased costs for almost everything, how does that benefit the people of the state of Minnesota?
What are you going to do, though, to stay relevant at the discussion level?
I'd like to answer that last question as well, because we've seen in the House side, House File number 1, DFL's number 1 priority. Symbolically, that's typically their biggest priority, is to pay back the school shift. This budget punts the shift into the next biennium. We're not dealing with the number 1 priority of the House DFL caucus. And I'll join them in saying that we need to pay back the shift. We're not meeting our obligations in this current budget. We're punting that down the road. How many times have we heard the DFL say that that's not responsible? Now it's their own budget that shows that that's not responsible. So they're going to put more money on the bottom line of the formula, but we're not going to deal with the obligation. We're going to kick that down the road. So we're not paying back the money that we owe these schools, but they're going to put some more money on the formula. So it's just not responsible budgeting.
When you sit at the table, though, with the governor's people or with the Democrats in the legislature, how do you put the Republican position in a position to have some kind of impact and not simply get overruled by majority vote?
Well, we don't have the votes. We can make the case. We will make the case, and we will certainly invite the public to come to the legislature and voice their opinion on the increased taxes. I'm sure we'll get a robust discussion on those things. We don't think this is good policy for the state of Minnesota. And so as we have these bills come through committees, we're going to have that discussion, and we'll continue to make the argument. But at the end of the day, they do have the votes to pass the budget that they wish. We had approached differently 2 years ago. We think that was an approach that had bore some fruit and was prudent and successful. They've taken a different approach, and we will see how the public judges that.
It's not good policy. DFL leaders stood here before you and said, ask Republicans if they're not for more money for education, property tax cuts, business tax cuts. Any of that sound good?
Well, I think it depends on what you can afford to do and whether you're getting any reform along with those increases in spending. I think if they want to turn the gavels over to us and run the committees again and show them how to do it, we're happy to do it.
Do you want business tax cuts, property tax relief?
Well, I would like to see our tax code reform to reduce the tax burden overall, altogether. And I think we should think about that. I think we need to improve our climate for investment and growth in the economy, and I think those things would accomplish it. But I don't think that's what the governor's budget accomplishes. So I think that to me what we're doing here is we're doing a little bit of shifting and, frankly, some gimmicks in this budget that are going to result in taxes being raised on everybody in the economy to pay for a very, very large increase in spending. that doesn't have, at least in my opinion so far, any reform that is really going to get about solving the problems. What about, the achievement gap in education? Anything in this budget getting at that? I don't see it. We had some very good success in a program last year that got at improving reading scores for early child education in the first few grades of elementary school. Nothing in the budget that I've seen that addresses that, tries to increase that program.
What do you think of the general concept?
I'd like to answer that question as well. You asked about businesses. And I said, very emphatically that we want Minnesota to be a climate where job creators can thrive. 92% of Minnesota businesses that file in Minnesota file under the personal income tax side of it. So what we're doing is we're raising taxes on those people. This budget raises taxes on job creators. This budget makes Minnesota's job creation climate less competitive. And that's why I said a fitting title for this budget is a budget for a better Wisconsin, because that's where Minnesota's jobs are going to go under this budget.
This is a major shift in where the state gathers its money. Right now it's about 40% property tax, 33% income tax, and 27% sales tax. This would basically change it to a third, a third, a third. Can you react to that?
Well, I think that's what they say. I don't know if that's true or not. We'll see when the revenues come in whether that really turns out to be that way. I don't know yet. Part of the presentation we saw, they gave some examples. They said, well, these sales taxes are not going to affect anybody. We're going to raise $2 billion or something in sales taxes, but nobody's going to pay them. And I looked at the presentation. I said, well, how does that work? You're showing us examples of ordinary families, and they're not going to pay anything in sales tax, but we're going to see a net increase. Well, how does that happen? Well, it's going to be levied primarily on activity that businesses are going to engage in. So the businesses are going to be absorbing these taxes, and what's going to happen? They're just going to, not pass those on to ordinary people and consumers. So, of course, people are going to pay. Now, that all comes into the state ledgers. Are those volatile? Are they less volatile than income taxes? I think that's been part of the argument, that income taxes are volatile. We need to try to make it more stable. I'm not sure at the end of the day whether you're going to see that equalization that the governor or the commissioner wants to see when you do this. I don't know. I don't know if there's a virtue in that, but that's what the plan is. We'll see.
Do you see a virtue in broadening the sales tax base and lowering the rate?
I think there is a virtue in lowering the rate. I think when you talk about broadening the base, I think it depends on to what extent you're doing it. If the argument is that you're going to somehow ask people to pay taxes on things that they're not paying taxes on, I guess I'd, as a start, say let's just lower the rate and see what that does. And then and we'll talk about broadening the base after that. But let's lower the rate first and see what that does for us.
So if this isn't the solution, then what's the alternative?
Well, we took an approach 2 years ago with a much more serious deficit that we thought was, again, we thought it was a successful approach. We said, let's live with the revenue that the economy is generating. Let's not add additional burdens to the economy. And let's try to manage the spending growth within those parameters. We felt that was a successful approach that has, in our opinion, borne some fruit. And the governor's budget, frankly, is premised on those things actually working. Why we wouldn't continue with that when that approach going the out biennium already shows that we are going to be in structural balance, why wouldn't we continue to do that? And if you're asking for a whole lot more spending and a whole lot more taxes to do that, the question is, well, all right, well, what are we doing that for? What's the big thing that we're going to get for this? What's the big idea, Governor, that we're going to raise all these taxes and all the spending to do? To buy down property taxes? Is that the big idea? What is the big thing that we're going to gain from this by this? And that's not clear to me.
Are you willing to propose a Republican alternative?
We have shown some things in the past, a couple of years, of what our alternative approach would be. I think that's pretty clear. We don't have the gavels, but as I said before, if the Democrats want us to propose our own budget, then let us have the gavels and we'll show them how to do it. We could manage this, I think, in a more fruitful way than what the governor's proposal is.
Senator, you said that everyone will pay more under the governor's budget. The governor specifically said across the street that total taxes, 98% of the people won't pay any more, and some of them will pay less.
Yes,
is he misrepresenting that? How is he misrepresenting that? Tell Minnesotans if he is.
I don't know how you can say you're going to collect $2 billion more in sales tax and not have the people of the state pay that. Somebody's going to pay that tax. And who's going to pay it if it's not going to be the people who buy things in the state? If you go out and get an oil change on your car, you're going to pay a sales tax on that. If you go out and get a haircut, you're going to pay a sales tax. You join a health club, you're going to, and those are things that you are not paying sales tax on right now. So those taxes are going to be collected, and they're going to be collected on people, ordinary citizens. So everybody is going to pay those taxes. You know, it's kind of like at the federal level when President Obama said that he was only going to tax the wealthy, but starting January 1st, everybody got a tax on their income right off the bat. I think there is I don't want to call it deception, but you just cannot raise revenue and say it's only going to be focused on this little group of people over here, and they're the ones that are going to finance all the things we want government to do. Everybody's going to get hit with these taxes. We've seen it at the federal level, and we're going to see it at the state level. Everybody's going to pay. And I think rather than try to hide that fact, we ought to just recognize that all of us are going to pay higher taxes, and the question should be, is it worth it?
And you think Minnesotans will pay more by having to pay for a broader range of services, despite the fact that the rate will go down?
$2 billion more is what the governor says. That's what his budget says, $2 billion more in sales tax. So, yes, the people of Minnesota are going to pay $2 billion more in sales tax. That's what his budget calls for. So, of course, there will be.
What do you say to Democrats who say this is what Minnesotans voted for in November?
I don't recall anybody in my race or any other race saying they wanted $2 billion more in sales tax, so I don't know about that. I don't know that anybody I remember saying that they wanted to see a $3.5 billion increase in taxes generally. I think that there was a lot of talk about fairness, and there was a lot of talk about honest budgeting and so forth, but those are fairly non-content rich descriptions of things. So I guess to me it's a stretch to say people of Minnesota voted. We'll find out as we have the debate on the budget whether or not this is what people really ask.
Senator, the point was made that in the 1960s a third of our sales dollars, consumer dollars, were spent on services, 2/3 on actual goods, and that's totally flip-flopped by now, so that our tax, the sales tax code, doesn't reflect reality of consumption in the 21st century. Would a lower rate make more sense overall, but then still lean over and pick up services, something such as that?
Well, I never claimed to be a tax expert, but I think in many of our caucus, and I'm sure it's true in the House as well, we think that there's room for reform, but in my opinion, personally, I think tax reform starts with looking at trying to lower rates, trying to do things that would encourage growth and encourage economic activity, and doing it in a way that is transparent and isn't shifting the burdens to people, but doing it in a straightforward way. I think everybody, all of us, we all want to pay our fair share. We all want to do it in a straightforward way. I think there's room for dialogue, discussion, and reform on those principles.
What the government is claiming is creation of thousands of new jobs. You didn't have specifics, but thousands of new jobs from economic development programs and other initiatives. How would you assess the job creation pieces that are in this budget?
Well, I haven't seen them. I haven't looked in detail at his budget, but I haven't seen what those job creation pieces are. Judging from what I've seen in the last few years and the debates that we've had, typically when they talk about job creation, they talk about taking money out of the private sector and moving it into the legislature, and then we spend it and we hire people to work for the government in some way, and that's job creation. I don't think that really results in economic growth. You can spend money and hire people to do things, but that doesn't mean that you're growing the economy. What we're talking about is economic growth, and that comes by having the private sector do investment, hiring people, producing things of value. That's how you grow the economy.
Are there some spending areas in the budget that you flat out disagree with? Have you taken a look at it in that much detail?
Right. We see that he's reinstating the political contribution refund program. So we're taxing baby Tylenol to pay for welfare for politicians. We think that's wrong. There's a lot of the services that are being taxed, as the senator said. We still don't know, and it sounds like daycare might be getting taxed as well. So if a family has children,
where do you get the baby Tylenol? Medical service.
Non-prescription drugs are taxed under this bill, so it's listed in his list of tax items.
Any other spending areas, though? The tax areas clearly you have problems with.
Of course, I would argue let's not do the health care exchange, number one. That's a big cost with that. That's probably $40 to $100 million right there. I question the expansion of the Medicaid program before the Medicaid program has been reformed at the federal level. I think those things have huge costs associated with them. I think there's a bunch of things. But fundamentally, if they are serious about having us find ways to reduce spending, turn the gavels over to us and we'll show them how to do it. We did 2 years ago. We'll be glad to do it again.
Representative Daudt, if this budget were to pass as is in the 2014 election, how do you think voters would respond when you go back to the polls?
Well, I think it would fare well for Republicans. I don't think people are going to respond very well to paying tax on a coat for their children. There's a lot of things that are going to hit middle-income families really hard in this budget in Minnesota. So the governor hasn't lived up to his campaign promises that he was going to tax only the top 2%. What he's doing here is letting down middle-income Minnesotans. I think that would probably do nothing but fare well for Republicans in the next election cycle. But I didn't come here to talk about politics and positioning my caucus to do well in the next election. We all serve here and make sacrifices because we want to do what's best for Minnesota. So that's why we're here. And my caucus is ready to roll up its sleeves and get to work on this. I know the governor said that this is a starting point. I'm very glad to hear that because I think there's a lot of work to do on this budget before we come up with something that's actually going to help Minnesota.
You all were briefed this morning on the budget, and then the governor is coming to talk to your caucuses later today. Clearly, that hasn't tempered your remarks. So, is there anything fruitful coming out of that?
Coming out of the presentation this morning?
The briefing or him visiting your caucus?
Well, the briefing was simply I think probably the same thing that you may have seen, run through of the slide presentation, just showing the outlines of the numbers. And that's really all we had, an opportunity to ask a few questions. But what the governor wants to talk about, he hasn't given us any indication of what his message might be. So I really don't know what he wants to talk to us about. We asked what the topic was, and we weren't really told anything.
They're both examples of his administration reaching out to Republicans. Will that make any difference in the debate going forward?
I suspect that he's not going to come to us and say, give me your top 5 things you want in the budget and I'll put them in. I doubt he'll say that. If he does, we'll be glad to take him up on that, but I doubt that'll be his message. But we'll see. We'll find out.
Thank you. Any other last questions?
Well, the governor wants a bonding bill. He obviously needs Republicans for that. Is there anything specifically that you might pick away at in the budget?
Well, I think for the state to borrow more money and start paying interest on that, in addition to the $3.7 billion of additional revenue and additional spending that's in the budget, I think that's, in my opinion, not warranted, given the past couple of years where we've had $1 billion in borrowing, plus money for a professional sports stadium. I just don't believe that doing more borrowing and spending is warranted this year.
Any issue with the snowbird tax that he is
Well,
re-implementing?
I did hear about that. That was not part of the presentation we saw this morning. I don't even think that's constitutional. I don't even know how you do that. And as far as I can see, there's not a lot of money attached to it. To me, it seems sort of gratuitous to say we're going to try and do that. I mean, why? What is it, $15 million attached to that or something? I don't even get that. So,
Thank you.
Thank you.